Welcome in to the New Orleans Saints podcast, hosted by Erin Summers and John DeShazier. You'll hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and writers who cover the team on a daily basis. The New Orleans Saints podcast starts right now. Here's your hosts, Erin Summers and John DeShazier.
Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. I'm Erin Summers. The Saints take on the Tampa Bay Bucs this Sunday, 12 o'clock on Fox. It'll be a fun way to ring in the new year, and there is a lot at play in this one. Tampa Bay can clinch a playoff spot in the NFC South with a win Sunday. The Saints, they need to win out and for Tampa Bay to lose to Carolina in the last game of the regular season in order to take the NFC South and ensure themselves a playoff spot. Even if that doesn't happen, the Saints do still have a slim shot at getting a wild card spot. However, they will need some help from some other teams. Fox Sports NFC South reporter Greg Auman will join John DeShazier and myself shortly to break down the Bucs and the rest of the division. However, first we wanted to give a shout out to one of our assistant coaches right here with the Saints and former offensive lineman, Jari Evans, for being named one of 15 finalists for the Pro Football Hall of Fame's class of 2024. Just this Wednesday. Evans played on 5 playoff teams here, including the team's Super Bowl winning squad in 2009, and earned Pro Bowl honors for 6 straight seasons. He was also inducted into the Saints Hall of Fame in 2020. Evans was previously named a semifinalist in 2023 in his first year of eligibility. This is his first time as a finalist. Evans is also joined as a finalist by cornerback Greg Auman, who played with the Saints from 1995 to 1997, making the Pro Bowl in 95 with the Saints. John and I sat down with Evans after he was named a semifinalist. You can listen to that interview on the Saints podcast from December 1st. Now, let's get into this week's game with Greg Auman. Greg, thank you so much for joining us on the New Orleans Saints podcast. You're a great person to have on leading up to the Bucs game, but also just because you are Fox Sports' NFC South reporter. So you kind of are right there in the thick of it right now, is trying to figure out who is going to take this NFC South title. And a lot of it falls into this weekend's game. So how are you doing at this point in the season?
Doing good. It's good to cover a close division. It's maybe not the best division in the NFL, but to have it 3 wide and have all 3 teams still have something to play for is a cool thing. And it's where the percentages certainly lean towards the Bucs here. But if they don't take care of business, Atlanta's still in it. I think Atlanta only has to win 1. Like if the Bucs lose out and the Falcons beat the Saints, that's all the Falcons need to win the division, which is wild. It seems like you should be writing them off at some point, but they're still very much alive. So no, cool to have 3 teams still playing on New Year's Eve with something to play for.
How surprising is it that this is where we are and that it is the Bucs that seem to have the upper hand?
Yeah, this was one of those where going into the year, it's funny, everybody like in June and July and August is asking who your pick is. And my whole thing was I really thought it was still going to be close. Like I didn't necessarily know. I certainly thought Carolina was going to be more involved than they are. I had thought that, Reich and a veteran coach, and by the time they get that quarterback ready, they should be right there, and missed badly on that, as a lot of people did. And then the rest is kind of, I had thought when you saw like Sports Illustrated had like the Bucs at 3-14, somebody else had them like 4-13. And I thought they were better than that, but I really didn't know, certainly didn't see Baker Mayfield having the year he's had. And then the Falcons, I think all 3 of these teams that are still in it have had kind of like a 2 or 3 week jaunt where they're the team to beat. And they've also given that up pretty actively. So it's hard to think now. Now you look and it's just all the Bucs have to do is win one of the last 2 and they're in. But if they don't win Sunday, and the Saints game, that first Saints game, we think about that first Saints game and it's 26-9 and it seems like a lopsided game, but it was a 1-score game with 5 minutes to play. It was tight to where one turnover goes the wrong way. This is a game that goes the other direction. And I think that's the way Sunday is. And I think the Bucs are aware of that too. It's one of those where they've had good success against New Orleans in the last year and a half, but they know the guys who have been in this locker room more than 2 years know that wasn't always the case. So I think there's definitely an appreciation that they kind of would do well to get it done this week and not put it on the road against a team that's playing its last game and will be motivated to have some kind of positive uptick to the end of the season.
I like the spin that you just put on the Panthers there in that game because, They have won a couple this year, but seems like the Bucs could have that one. As far as the Saints Bucs game this upcoming weekend, both of these teams look very different than they did earlier this season. They're playing much better on both sides of the ball. And the Bucs behind Baker Mayfield 4-0 this month. What has changed in the way that he's leading this team?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things around him that have kind of set things up. I think they're running the ball much better. This was a team that wanted to run the ball the first 2 months of the season and really didn't do it with any consistency at all. Rachaad White's been a lot better running the ball in the last 4 or 5 games, and I think that's kind of freed things up. Mayfield's played well. I mean, this is one of those where even when he had rough patches, he wasn't turning it over, and that was always my big question with Mayfield is how well he can keep his interceptions in check. His 2020 season, when I signed him, I was kind of like, if they can get 2020 Mayfield, that could work out really well. And that was, I think, 26 touchdowns and 7 picks. And he's got, I think he has 8 picks, but 25 touchdowns. I mean, he's kind of right there. Him not actively losing games, I think, has kept them in some games. Their defense has been really inconsistent. I think they look back now and the Falcons game, the Texans game, the Colts game, there's probably 2 or 3 games they know they could have won if they'd played a little better down the stretch. But again, they've kind of righted the ship. To think that they were 4-7 and are back to where they are. They've matched their win total from last year. And again, it's kind of right in front of them. Whether they take advantage of that Sunday or not remains to be seen. But I mean, this was if you look about 3-4 weeks ago, you didn't know if Bowles would be back. You didn't know if Jason Light would be back. You didn't know if Mayfield was really going to be the guy. And now you can kind of lock in all 3 of those if they win on Sunday.
Greg, has Mayfield dialed back some, I guess, in his risk taking? I mean, because as you mentioned, a guy who isn't actively losing games in the last 4, especially, I think 9 touchdowns and interception, 1,000 yards or so. They won 4 straight. He seems to be a guy who kind of grasps the concept of allowing his teammates to help him.
Yeah, I agree. I think he has. And it was one of those where when he came in, he had a little bit of Jameis Winston to him, where he's just this amazing playmaker, but also a guy that at times really struggles to keep his mistakes in check. And with Jameis, I mean, we were talking about how like Baker has a chance to have one of the best kind of non-Tom Brady quarterback seasons in Bucs history, which isn't necessarily saying that much. There's not a whole litany of great quarterbacks that have played here. But I do think him trusting, and this is with a first-year coordinator, a first-time play caller in Dave Canales, and I think those two have really trusted each other to stay in the system and trust what's there and not freelance, not go outside the box. And again, for him to have whatever it is, week 17, he hasn't had more than 1 pick in a game. That's not who he's been in the NFL. So it definitely represents a step forward. Whether he's actively scaling back, probably hasn't had as many games this year where you're down 17 points and you have to start making those risk throws. It's a big part of why they're still alive. With I think with a bad turnover quarterback this year, they might be 6-9 instead of 8-7, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Sunday, we're going to miss out on one of the classic NFL rivalries, and that would be Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore, 2 guys who can't stand each other's guts. But Mike Evans seems to be trucking right along. I think it's 10 consecutive seasons with 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
How has he, I guess, kind of helped Mayfield and the offense settle, because he's a guy who's reliable and you know exactly what you're going to get from him each season? Yeah,
you're absolutely right. I always felt like Brady didn't necessarily take full advantage of having Mike Evans, especially near the goal line. Just one of those where, he's got such a big catch radius and a good leaping ability. And Baker just trusts him implicitly. They're there for them to have, I think it's 13 touchdowns. And Mike, this is Mike's 5th year with 12 or more touchdowns, which puts him in a really elite group. And he's come on strong late too. I think he's kind of added to it. Like you said, New Orleans, I mean, nobody has kept him in check better than New Orleans has. And that probably starts with Marshawn Lattimore. So they are missing out on that. But I think there's even been games where Marshawn hasn't been there and he's been held in check. So it's a game that will mean a lot to him. It's his last home game of the season. He has a chance to, I guess, one more touchdown would match his own team record for touchdowns in a season. He's leading the NFL in touchdowns. No Buck has ever done that. So he has some motivation. I think when you've got Tyreek Hill 1 touchdown behind you, you kind of want to pad the lead a little bit, if you will, and build that cushion. So I think he's going to want to, and that's half. Baker has 26 touchdowns and half of them are Mike Evans. And it's really, there's not a big group of guys that have had half the touchdowns for their team passing in a season, but he's been able to do that.
How are the Bucs defensively? Because we know Vita Vea is still there, but they were a team that you simply could not run against for a 5, 6, 7 year stretch. And now obviously they're not that same defense.
Yeah, I think they've been inconsistent, and I think they've been dinged up a lot on the back end. Ed probably was just out of practice. Carlton Davis is in concussion protocol, so he could miss the game Sunday. They kind of have a good thing where they have 3 corners that they've had to use a lot this year. So if it's Jamel Dean and Zion McCollum on Sunday, those are 2 guys they still trust. But, they missed Devin White for 3 games. He's back now. Vita Vea has missed games. So when they're in full strength, I think they're a really good defense. They haven't been very much this year. You go back to that first Saints game, one of their better defensive games of the season to keep them out of the end zone. That was kind of when the Saints were struggling in the red zone. They've definitely solved that. So again, if you hold them to 3 scores now, it's more likely 17 points or 21 points and not 9 points. But no, I think the Bucs have come together. Sunday when they beat Jacksonville, were +4 in turnovers, which is a great thing. So takeaways were always kind of the bread and butter of a Todd Bowles defense, and now they're tied for the league lead in turnover margin, and they're 1 back of Dallas for the most takeaways. So that's probably what they do best. If you can face a Bucs defense and not turn the ball over, they're going to give up yards, and they're going to put you in a position to win if you don't make those big mistakes like turnovers.
Now, how has Todd Bowles been able to handle this season? Because we have a coach here, Dennis Allen, who obviously has been under some heat this season, and we know that Todd Bowles was too. But he's kind of the guy who's more or less in the driver's seat for the division now.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of parallels between Allen and Bowles. I mean, both had prominent offensive head coaches that left, and they were elevated. Bowles had a division title last year, but he had an 8-9 division title. So I think they both were very much on thin ice even a month ago. And Todd's definitely helped himself. Again, I mean, Dennis Allen, to have his team where they need help now, but if they win Sunday, and obviously that sets up an absolutely huge home game against the Falcons in week 18, I think they've done well to keep themselves in it. That loss against the Rams stings a little bit right now because they could be a team coming in with 3 straight wins with a little bit more momentum like the Bucs have. But no, I think Bowles has to think that this is a team that lost 6 out of 7 at one point. There's not many teams that lose 6 out of 7 and are able to right the ship. And a big part of that, I think, was Bowles. He gets knocked for it sometimes, but he's really an even keel guy. Doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. And that's kind of what you need to not panic when you've lost that many games and just trust the players that you have and the schemes that you have. And also to kind of get some lesser opponents in face of the Panthers and some of the teams that they've faced down the stretch that make it easier to win close games.
One of the players that I feel like has come on this season for the Bucs is their rookie linebacker in Yaya Diaby. How have you seen him just progress throughout the season? Because right now he leads the team with 6.5 sacks.
Yeah, I think he's tied for the rookie lead of all rookies. And this is a mid-round pick. It's been neat to see, and that he was a physical specimen when they came in, was stuck behind a former first-round pick in Joe Tryon-Shoyinka here, so was kind of getting 20, 30 reps a game, made some splash plays, and I think it's been probably about a month or more that he's been a starter now, where it's like now he's playing 60% of the defensive snaps in a game. Really great kid, neat to see. He and Kalijah Kancey have kind of helped each other. I think they're 1-2 in the NFL among rookies in tackles for losses. I think Kancey has 10 and Diaby has 9. They've really stepped up. So it's neat. Diaby's a fun guy, a guy that's been through a lot, wasn't expected to be a huge NFL player, played inside some at Louisville, and has really found himself. I mean, if you look at him physically, he's a tank. He's just really thick and athletic, and it makes sense. And he's just a gamer where he's able to kind of get to the quarterback and make some plays. He's part of the reason I think the Bucs have had this turnaround and done well is that they were leaning on a lot of young players and rookies that needed 2 or 3 months to find themselves in the NFL. So a guy like Cody Mauch, who's their right guard, wasn't real good in the first month of the season and is now really getting some confidence behind him. Kalijah Kancey missed the first month of the season with injury, has done well. And Yaya Diaby is definitely a guy that they're excited about now in that, with Shaq Barrett over 30, you don't know how many more years you have left with him. You kind of needed somebody to step up as a potential double-digit sack guy, somebody that defenses have to kind of game plan around. And he's kind of become that, which is crazy for somebody who was, probably the 15th pass rusher picked in the draft.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people throw him out there as defensive rookie of the year potential for this season. So definitely looks like a good pick for you guys or for the Bucs. Offensively, we talked about Baker, but I know the offensive line was beat up a lot. There was a lot of changes there to start the season. It looks like they found some continuity. The rushing attack has been a lot better over the past few games. What has been the cause for the ability to really kind of establish a ground game?
Yeah, it's a few things. They really feel good about their right tackle, Luke Gedeke, who kind of struggled as a guard last year, second round pick a year ago. He's settled in where they have, two really good tackles they can start with in Tristan Wirfs, who's having another kind of Pro Bowl caliber season. And then their guards have kind of stepped up. The left guard, they made a switch in midseason. They had a veteran named Matt Filer, who was the starter. He got hurt, and they've actually had better play from a backup guy who stepped up to Aaron Stinney. Has been here 4 or 5 years, but really rarely as a starter. Was actually a starter in their Super Bowl run in 2020, but hadn't really made an impact since. He's played well. Cody Mauch, like we said, as a rookie on the right side, has played well. Robert Hainsey is kind of in his second year where he wasn't supposed to be the starter, but Ryan Jensen has missed the last 2 years with injury now. And Hainsey has stepped up, has been more physical, is certainly a communicator who can line everybody up and identify the defensive alignments they have to be careful about. And between the five, I think the continuity of having just about all of them for 12, 13 games has helped them kind of gel as a unit. They had a different blocking scheme this year with a new offense, and that took a while to kind of take shape. But they're a big part of why Rachaad White has kind of been at least an 80-yard rusher, and a much bigger part of a balanced offense here in the last month.
Sure. We talked about Coach Bowles and Baker Mayfield, but on the other side with Coach Allen and Derek Carr, how have you seen this team evolve this season with a new quarterback?
Right. Such ups and downs. I mean, I remember early on being there, and it seemed like something that really would take. And then obviously they had their struggles. And then for a while, it seemed like the storyline was the red zone woes. And then they really solved that. I forget when it was, but it was like 4 games where they'd gone like 9 for 10 in the red zone. And if anything, had made it kind of a strength. And obviously the offense came up short against the Rams, but I think Carr has done a much better job, in limiting his turnovers and in connecting. I mean, you think about him having success throwing for yards when he doesn't have Olave, when he doesn't have Michael Thomas. Shaheed is certainly a guy who stepped up. I think he's got multiple touchdowns to A.T. Perry. Obviously was finding Jimmy Graham just in those end zone cameos where he's only playing 8 snaps, but managed to get a touchdown. There was a point, maybe 5-6 weeks ago where you weren't really sure why Jimmy Graham was still on this team. And he's kind of helped carve out that niche as a guy who just, again, for his career is so prolific at scoring touchdowns. You do that. So, yeah, it's one of those where the big difference, I think, between Carr and Mayfield is that Carr, I don't think, has had the same embracing of the offense around him and the team. And then Mayfield, I think Baker here is very much just widely adored and seen as a leader. And Derek kind of still has to earn that. But I think statistically, to watch where his play is in the last 5 or 6 games, he's taken a step forward. They haven't necessarily had the consistency in the offensive line they'd like to have. They dealt with so many injuries there. And I think he's kind of overcome that, has overcome being without some of his best targets at times to at least be a strong quarterback from a touchdown interception ratio standpoint.
What do you think this game is going to come down to on Sunday?
Yeah, it's silly because it seems like a cop-out, but like turnovers. I mean that if you think about that first game, I think it was like 2 Winston turnovers late that kind of sealed it. And they had done a really good job without that. This is one of those where I think the Bucs always take some slight that they're not as big a rival for the Saints as the Falcons are. And they want that to be there. And I think part of that is kind of the back and forth, And for a while there, the Saints, had won so consistently against the Bucs. I mean, the 2020 playoffs was kind of the weird lapse in that. And now you've had a little bit back to where the last 3 the Bucs have won. And I think part of a rivalry, you kind of need to have a back and forth. And I think part of the reason the Bucs have won these games is that they've been really careful in avoiding turnovers. And both teams, you think about, the Saints had 7 picks as a team last year. And, they had doubled that, like with 5 games left in the season. So they've been a much better, more dangerous takeaway team. And as much as Baker has been able to keep his turnovers in check, they've had fumble problems at times. So I think it has to start. If the Bucs want to win this game, it's like 1 turnover or less. They do really well to get a lead early. I think one of the things that made Jacksonville easy is it was like 10-0 halfway through the first quarter. And that's not been who the Bucs are this season. Bucs haven't had an opening drive touchdown all year. So to get out early, to set a lead where now they can run the ball. If you can run the ball 35 times, Baker's probably at his best when he's thrown about 28 times. If he's throwing the ball 40 times, that's not a recipe for success. It usually means you got way behind. And you think about this, the Saints game last year, Bucs won it. It counts as a Buc win, but it's like 16-3 with like 4 minutes to go. And that's one of those games where there weren't many things that Brady did amazingly well last year in his last year in the NFL, but those crazy, ridiculous last-minute comebacks, he had like 4 of them. And that Saints game was certainly one of those. I don't think that's their plan. I don't think they want to set themselves up to be down, whatever it was, 13 with 5 minutes to play. But they do well just to kind of get in the lead, be in control, force New Orleans to be more predictable and throwing the ball a lot.
Yeah, you had to bring that one up. I don't think anybody forgets that one.
I look back on it, and it's just one of those where it's like, how did they? It's like somebody had a comeback that was like, I forget who it was this year, but somebody had a comeback that was like 14, and it was the first comeback in 15 years where they were down 14 with like 2 minutes to play. And that Bucs Saints game, I think, was like 1 second less and one point from being the one that would trip that list up. So yeah, crazy game. Again, I think if you're the Saints, I think you definitely can take some confidence knowing you went to that building and had the game won for 57 minutes out of 60. You just have to be able to close the door and finish it out.
Absolutely. I don't even want to have JD talk about rivals, because he'll go into it is Atlanta for sure.
Right. Well, and honestly, in covering the division more, I had always looked at Bucs Saints as just this absolute drama fest where, again, like you talked about, it's Evans and Lattimore jawing. It's Cam Jordan, mocking Donovan Smith when he got paid because he was excited about somebody getting to go to town every week against the Bucs. And there's so much cool back and forth. But then to go to Saints-Falcons game, you appreciate that for the fans, the guys who have been going head-to-head for whatever 40 years, it is that rivalry. And it's one of those where I try to explain to guys here, like it's not really a knock on, I think for the players and the individual feuds, there's definitely more juice to Bucs Saints probably because of the individual, just people not liking each other aspects. But Saints Falcons is another thing just because it has so much history behind it, I think.
Yeah, there's a healthy dislike for Tampa, but not the same kind of dread and hate for the Falcons. But,
right.
I mean,
that's what makes that Week 18 game amazing. If it has a game that has some relevance, and it could be one that even if the Bucs were to win Sunday, there could be some wild card implications to that game. So it's really cool to have that game actually mean something and be, if nothing else, the last thing these teams get to do. It's going to be the taste you have in your mouth for the rest of the offseason is how you did against your biggest rival in the last week of the season.
Neither is going to let the other one forget about it. I can guarantee you that. Right? Neither will let the other one forget about it.
Right.
Well, it's definitely shaping up to be, a nerve-wracking last couple weeks. You never know what's going to happen, but it's going to be fun, I guess. I hope it's going to be entertaining for sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you this weekend and in the future.
All right. Safe travels. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Saints podcast. Join us 3 times per week on NewOrleansSaints.com, the Saints mobile app, or you can download the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Saints podcast.